Hopefully you're seated somewhere where you have a piece of paper. You may or may not have a pen. There are some pens floating around, so if you happen to have brought a pen with you, and your neighbor doesn't have a pen, you can share. If you need more paper, we have plenty. I also did pass my card around, which you can take if you want.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Megan. I'm Women as Heroes Historian Web Coordinator. Welcome to the panel Mixed Messages, a critical discussion of the girl effect. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Heather Switzer, an Assistant Professor of Women and Gender Studies in ASU's School for Social Transformation, as well as Women as Heroes Faculty Advisor. Her research interests include girl studies, gender and international development, critical globalization studies, qualitative methodologies, and African feminist and gender theory. She teaches courses in women, gender, and society, feminist activism, women and social change, and girlhood and adolescence in a global context.
Thank you. Well, let's take just a second to give Women as Heroes a little round of applause. We're starting today. You probably need to know, if you don't already, that this entire conference, from its inception, the idea, all the way through its prosecution today, has been totally done by this sort of heroic band of undergraduate students. I'm nominally their advisor. I need them to advise me. So I'm really always impressed with what they do. We ostensibly have an hour, but we have a lot to do. What I'm hoping, and as I told Megan, in a departure a little bit from the rest of the sessions today, I'm not a panel, and I'm also not going to give a lecture. I'd like for this actually to be an interactive discussion. Raise your hand if you've seen anything about the girl effect before. Okay, so some of you are familiar, some of you are not. That's fine. We're going to look at it together. Those of you who have seen it know that it's a very sort of provocative set of images that are very moving. But I'm also wondering if they might not also be a little troubling. So what I'd like to do is spend a little time today unpacking that. Before we do, though, I just want to highlight three vocabulary words, if you will, that I'm going to be using and that I hope you'll join me in using because I think they make sense for what we're about to do. I call this a critical discussion, and I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about what I mean by critical, because I think, unfortunately, all too often, the general reaction to the concept being critical is that we're going to be mean-spirited, or we're going to sit here and hate on the girl effect, even though the girl effect has all of these wonderful intentions. I mean the exact opposite. By engaging in a critical inquiry, by asking questions, by trying to understand not only the assumptions we bring to the moment, but to the assumptions that the group of images, in this case the girl effect, brings, I think is really important to actually deepening our attention to social justice and our activism. We're going to be skeptical, but we're not going to be cynical. Okay, so I'd like for you to hang on to that idea. So what is a representation? Some of you may have heard this word in your classes. You may have been asked to look at representations and think about what representations are. A really simple way to think about it is it's a way to talk about the images, the words, actual language, and the symbols we use to make mental concepts real in the world. So this concept exists because we attach these four symbols together to make that word. And when you're really little, at some point your parents say, that's a girl and that's a boy, and you learn the difference, right? But, in a real sense, this is actually very arbitrary. I mean, your parents could have pointed to Zach and said, this is a girl. This is what we call this thing a girl, right? So representations are always culturally derived. They're always historically contingent. And I don't have this up there, which I'm not sure why, but they're always raced, they're always gendered, and they're always classed. Always. They're not necessarily natural, but they're constructed. So when we tell a story, we are always choosing the words, the images, the sound, the colors, everything that we are going to use to tell that story. So in that sense, it's actually up for grabs, okay, if representations have changed. We no longer imagine the masculine man to be the man wearing makeup and tights. But if you were in Elizabethan England and you were a man and you were not wearing makeup and tights, you would not be part of the aristocracy for sure, right? So in that little tiny example, we can see that representations change, and they're always embedded in culture. So discourse is just a fancy way of talking about a collection of representations, okay? A way of talking about systems or collections of representations that work together to help us not only understand what we see and what we call reality. Zach is a B-O-Y. I know Zach's not picking on him, plus he's our only B-O-Y. And Rachel is a G-I-R-L, or maybe she's a W-O-M-A-N. But maybe we're not sure, right? Because she may call herself a girl, but somebody else may call herself a woman, and what they call her matters in her everyday life. So that's good. So what we're going to be doing, essentially, is critically analyzing the representations that make up the discourse of the girl effect. We're just going to pile all those words together. I think, that's where representation was that I didn't fix it. Well, anyway, that's not spelled right. I think we often ask, especially in academic contexts, but even if you're sitting around your TV analyzing the commercials during the Super Bowl, or you get a love letter from your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're like, what is going on here? We're always asking, what do representations mean? What do these images, what do these words, what do these set of actions or activities, what do they mean? But I think it's important that we also have to ask, what do they do? Right? What kinds of effects can they actually make in our real world? So we're not just like, oh, it's just a movie, oh, it's just a love letter, oh, it's just a contract for a job. These things have real effects or impacts in our actual everyday world. So the bottom question here, one of the things I want you to be thinking about as we look at the girl effect, how does the repetition of certain representations of real impact our understanding of reality? Okay? And then this is just a quick example. One of the funnest and the easiest discourses to pick on is advertising. This is an American Apparel ad, two American Apparel ads. One thing I want you to have in the back of your mind too is the relationship between intentions and effects. Because a lot of times you can find people saying, well, I'm sure Budweiser didn't really intend that when they made that ad, right? I'm guessing American Apparel intends to sell t-shirts and shorts. Beyond that, I have no idea what their intentions are. But I can imagine that the effects of the representations they've chosen to sell t-shirts and shorts could be different, right? Based on the way they've set up these two sets of images here. So, what does any of this have to do with the girl effect? The girl effect is a lot of things at once. And for those of you who have seen it, you know that. And for those of you who are about to see it, you're going to see that. On the one hand, it's an awareness-raising campaign. Okay, it wants us, those of us who are sitting in this room, to think about and know about and have more awareness about some of the realities for adolescent girls in the developing world, although they don't really specify that. It's also a fundraising campaign. You have the capacity through the website to donate. And you can be linked to Global Giving, which is kind of a consolidator of a bunch of different charities, and they show you the organizations that the money will go to if you donate to the Girl Effect. It's a social media campaign. When they were launched in 2008, they exist in the world of Facebook, in the world of YouTube, and in the world of Twitter. Okay? It's also a branding campaign. This G is a brand. It's on t-shirts, it's on bumper stickers, it's on stickers you can download, right? You can literally smack the Girl Effect anywhere you want if you have access to this little G. It's also an advertising campaign, because we can't forget that Nike Foundation, the nonprofit wing of Nike Corporation, is the architect of the girl effect. So Nike Corporation has one job in life, and that's to make profit. And they make profit by expanding markets. Now, the Nike Foundation is separate. Their job is not to make profits. Their only job is to direct investment to adolescent girls in developing countries. But what is the relationship between the branding of the girl effect as an awareness and social media campaign and the advertising of Nike Corporation? So you can go to the website and you can download party favors. You can, if you want to have a fundraising party for the girl effect, but at the same time you can also find funded research reports and policy prescriptions. The girl effect itself calls itself a movement. So it's all of these things at once, right? So the bottom sentence there, it is a bundle or a collection of representations. It is a discourse that tells a very certain, circumscribed or narrow story about girls in the global south. So that's one of the things I want to unpack and think about. This is a question I want you to have in the back of your mind, and we're getting to the videos in like 2 seconds. What is the difference, or what is the relationship maybe, between awareness and engagement when it comes to social change? Certainly, currently at the moment, in the wake of the whole Coney 2012, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, event, there's been a lot of questions about the what it means to raise awareness, and is that enough? And so part of what I'm asking is how or why is it important to consider the potential effects of representations if we see the relationship between awareness and engagement as related but different? It's one thing to be aware, it's another, oh gosh, this thing does things on its own. It's one thing to be aware, it's another thing to be engaged. So we're not going to look at the website. It's a massive beast with a lot of stuff going on, but I highly recommend that you take a chance to look at it when you have time. It's just thegirleffect.org. But what we are going to look at are 3 short YouTube videos that are essentially viral. What's interesting and what I want to point out is that I dare you, the first one we're going to look at was the very first piece of media that the Nike Foundation released in 2006. The foundation was formed in 2004. But then in 2008, the Nike Foundation teamed up with the Novo Foundation, which is Peter Buffett, who's Warren Buffett's son. Peter Buffett and his wife Jennifer created the Novo Foundation, and they infused the Nike Foundation was something to the tune of, I think, at $55 million. And then Nike Corporation kicked in about another $45 million. So with that $100 million, they started doing a lot of things. And one of the things they did is they launched the Girl Effect, the website. And this, whoops, see, it just does what it wants. This video, and then the second video is called The Clock is Ticking, and it was just released in 2011. Now, unfortunately, I embedded the videos, but now they won't play, so I'm going to have to go use these links to go out to YouTube, so it's going to take a few minutes. But what I want you to do as you're looking at the videos is just keep a running list in your mind, and then you'll have a couple of minutes after we're done on that purple piece of paper. If you just want to make a list A and a list B, each of you. Does anybody not have a pen? Everybody have some? Yeah. Okay, or I have one. Just jot a couple of notes for yourself. The first thing I want you to think about is you're watching these 3 videos, and you're going to see that they're connected. They repeat a little bit, but they also change over time. What inspires you or moves you about the videos, about what you see? For those of you who are seeing them for the first time, I'll apologize. They go really quickly, and we don't have time to see them twice. But think about what, just from your gut reaction, what inspires you. Why do you think the representations you're seeing make you feel this way? Okay? And then in the second list, list B, I want you to think about what, if anything, disturbs you or worries you about the representations of adolescent females and communities in the Global South that you see in the videos. Okay, so nobody's going to take this up. You're not going to be graded. It's just a way you capturing what you were thinking at the moment. And then if you have a chance, and if we have a chance to talk about it, you might want to think about how social change as a process is represented in the videos, okay? So I'll come back to this screen after we look at the videos, but let me jump back here. Oh, goodness. Okay, so, all right, so is everybody ready? This is going to be the first, oh, Marshall's starting. Let me get it big. Okay, here, this is the first one, and they're listed up here. So this is called I Dare You.
I dare you to look at me and see only a statistic. Someone you'll never meet. A tragedy. A commodity. A child bride. I dare you to look at me without pity, fatigue, dismissal. I dare you to look at me as more than a poster for your cause. A promise you want to keep. I dare you to look at me and see I am the answer. I dare you to rethink what it means to look at a girl, not a burden, not an object, but the answer.
Okay, so hold on to that. That was the first one. This is the second one. It's called The Girl Effect. This is, the clock is ticking. This is the most recent one. We started a little late, so we're not going to have as much time as I wanted to discuss. But take just a couple of minutes and note a couple things that are list A and list B, and then we will discuss them. You can see these videos on the website if you want to look at them again. They're also downloadable. Has anybody not gotten anything written down? Let me ask you this, did anybody find nothing to write in list A, which is to say there was nothing inspiring or moving about the videos at all? Okay. Does anybody have nothing in list B? In other words, there was nothing that troubled you a little bit or worried you a little bit about the representations you saw? Okay, so that's pretty interesting, right? Because we can be both moved and inspired and troubled and worried by the same set of representations. That's where the mixed message part of the title comes from. So let's just kind of go around because we're in this nice little horseshoe and I think we have a few minutes to discuss this. What were some of the things that you thought were inspiring or moving about the representations you saw?
The power, the empowerment, the importance of the girl, the importance of good things like education, health, decrease of poverty. That's the good part that I saw.
that made you feel inspired or moved?
Yes.
Yeah.
The good intentions, and that was basically the good intent of what they were saying.
Yeah. Okay, so the positives of education, the positives of health,
Health, good health.
the positives of, sort of empowerment broadly, but these things specifically contributing to that. Is that correct? Okay. So who else wants to share a couple things that you found were moving or inspiring that may be different from what she said?
One of the things I found inspiring was that there's the image of that this isn't a one-time thing where you give a woman an education and it's self-contained. It's the idea that it spreads. It's almost like a disease in a good way. It spreads. It's infectious, and it doesn't just spread around the community. It spreads through generations too.
Yeah, so through time and space, right? So they have that graphic of the one dot that becomes a bunch of dots and then becomes a bunch more dots, right? And they're playing around with this idea of a ripple effect, which is exactly what happens. You throw the rock, you see the first ripple, there's a bunch of ripples. Next thing you know, the rock was way out there, but the ripple is hitting the shore, which is way over here, okay? Good. All right, let's get one more piece that someone felt was inspiring or moving about the representation.
I just wrote down the plain idea of having faith in a girl.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, great. So, having faith in a girl, which maybe what you're saying. What's your name?
Pearl.
Pearly?
Perla.
Perla. Excuse me. The implication is that prior to this idea of the girl effect, people don't have faith in girls,
Yeah.
right? So there should be just a widespread change of consciousness in which we suddenly, amazingly and miraculously have faith in girls. Is it possible that since the dawn of time, some people have had faith in girls? Probably, right? But when the architects of this discourse are looking at the research and they see, less girls are in school than boys. Girls have these X number of problems that they have to confront because they're female. And then that is exasperated when they're in conditions of poverty. And I would submit in conditions of poverty right here in Arizona or right down the road in Mississippi, right? You don't have to go all the way to Bangladesh, or you don't have to go all the way to Kenya, which is where I do my research. Okay, good. So I think these are some good ones, and since I imagine the rest of you have something similar reflected on your sheet of paper. There's no way to not look at this discourse and not feel inspired and moved. There really isn't any way. It's designed to be evocative. It's designed to be provocative, right? Like the advertisements were designed to be evocative and provocative, right? All right, so let's shift a little bit to list B. Somebody give me a couple of things that you found troubling or worrisome about the representations that you saw. Everybody had some, so somebody's gonna say a little.
One thing that troubled me is it made it seem like the answer is so easy, but I'm so pessimistic about implementing all the things they say you need to do to make things happen, because the culture or the situation or the economy it's really tough to have this, succeed. It just, that's what bothered me the most, that it's the answer is so obvious, but it's so hard to implement.
Okay. What's your name?
Hanan.
Hanan? Okay, so the fancy word sometimes you see about that is panacea, right? Or silver bullet is the colloquial expression, right? If we just educate a girl, we're going to end war. Not only are we going to end poverty, we're going to end war, the spread of disease, everything. Every possible bad thing you can imagine comes down to this one girl's. She has to have a dress on. She has to have pigtails. And she has to have breasts. Education, right? It seems it's portrayed as very straightforward and very linear, right? Nothing is getting in the way of that equation. Add this, and you'll get this. Nothing is getting in the way of that, right? like global financial crisis, or changes in international monetary fund policy, or a new government in your country, right? All of those things could be getting in the way of that beautiful linear equation. Good. What else did you see? Yeah.
It says that girls don't have any agency until you give it to them.
Okay. Okay, what's your name?
Elise,
Elise? What do you mean by agency?
she has no power over her life whatsoever, and only by you giving her this money, this cow, will she be able to claim her life.
Who gives it to her?
We do, the white
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. We may not be white, but we are probably Western, quote unquote, right? Or Southern. And so we don't have a ton of time left, so I don't want to get into this too much, but the relationship between the viewer and the viewed is very skewed. On the one hand, she'll do everything. It's all about the girl, but not until those of us in this room take the step to invest, right? Does anybody give someone agency? So that is a kind of a problematic. Okay, let's get one more. Since we had 3 positives, let's get 3 worries or 3 troubling things. Yeah.
I just wanted to throw out, like, I feel like, of course, these were like very staged, and even in the girl effect, they put dramatic pause, and they talk about fixing a girl, and just having such negative implications toward, like, marriage, because saying like, oh, this is the way you have to do it in order to succeed, whereas not really looking as to what, like, not seeing how everything's so intersectional, you know. So it was like, I mean, yeah, how we said, it was very linear, and then just overall making the girls seem very helpless and hopeless, like the first piece really did.
Yeah. All of them. There's 52 million. And they're all helpless and hopeless. If they aren't in school, then they're definitely prostitutes. Right? Or I would say more accurately, engaging in transactional sex. Ironically, there's plenty of studies that indicate that to get to school, you engage in transactional sex. Once you're in school, teachers may expect transactional sex. So the image where the hands can't get in the school, the creepy hands are bounced back by the school because she's safe in school, really does ignore the fact that sometimes the path to school involves a lot of these scary situations for girls, and to a certain degree even for boys. Though boys, big difference, boys are not going to get pregnant. And so controlling fertility and reducing pregnancy is a really big deal. Yeah, so, and also, I'm glad that you mentioned this missing or context or the connections of her context. We see one male, quote unquote, in all 3 videos. We see him. I mean, this is the purest way of representing that person. There's no face, there's no body, right? There's just this word. And his entrance onto the scene is inherently oppressive. Right? He literally pounds her down. Her and baby. She had baby before she had husband. Right? So did you notice that little detail? For whatever reason, husband came because of baby. Probably not by her choice. Right? Maybe even not the baby, not by her choice. So in every case, we have female people represented, some mostly young female people, but we do have this sort of graphic adult woman, and the clock is ticking, right? The lady with the bun, who's attending to the little girl when she's in the happy version of her, girl number 2, not girl number 1. But we see no men, no boys, but there is the constant threat of male violence and sexual appropriation of female bodies. Some men, obviously, sexually violate girls and women, but not all. So how do we wrap that piece in there? How do we actually talk about gender, which is to say masculinity and femininity? Good. I think I'm afraid we're like careening toward the end. No, it's 10:53. Okay, so So what do we do with this mixed message? Because on the one hand, and I just want to hear your thoughts, I don't necessarily have an answer, but I have a couple ideas. What do we do with a discourse that is incredibly prominent? I will just say that this idea of the girl effect, Nike Foundation has been to Davos, the World Economic Forum. They're at the Clinton Global Initiative every year. They have the ear of some of the most influential people in the world, and are really trying, I think, with incredibly good intentions, of shifting development focus toward these 52 million people who they would argue, and I would agree, have been left out of the conversation. But then when we make the shift and we put them on the agenda, what are some of the risks that we run by suddenly targeting them, right? Especially if this is the discourse that's framing that targeting. Once you're 12, if you hit puberty and your marriage is arranged, it's too late for you, right? The window is shut on you. We've got to go to your sister, who hopefully we can get her in school, and she's the one who's really going to make the difference. But it's too late for you. How do you think we should deal with this mixed message of both inspiration and worry?
We have a sort of counter movement
Oh, okay.
where you bring out ideas of something like this.
Uh-huh.
You may not have the same backing, the monetary and the advertising effect and everything, but it can be done.
Okay.
Like where somebody points out the things you just pointed out, including the fact that we're focusing on the problems in the developing world. We have a lot of those same things right here, like you said.
Yeah.
Just because we go to school, it doesn't mean
Right.
we don't have prostitution and all that
And
kind of things.
massive
What about our
teenage
drug
pregnancy
situation
dropout
right
rates,
here?
yeah.
What about, it could go on like that.
Tell me your name again, I'm sorry.
Valerie?
Valerie, yeah. And the other thing that I think that you make a very good point about, Valerie, not only do we have our own gendered imbalances and gender dysfunction and power differentials right here in the United States or Britain or Canada, Australia, any of the quote-unquote developed countries that this targets, the discourse also forgets the hugely long history of global history. So it never tells you how these people got so daggone poor. It's just like a given. Like, those people are poor. Those people have problems. And we have an obligation to give them agency, to empower them, whatever it is we're going to do, right? So that dynamic, the relationship between the developed and the developing world, or the global south and the global north, or the west or the rest, or whatever words you want to use, is never examined. We're never asked as viewers to think about that relationship. Okay, good. This graphic is from the website, and this whole idea that you start the girl effect, you, me, us, those of us who are reviewing, those of us who are in a position to invest, so she can do the rest. How do we act on the behalf of others without othering them, right? Without putting them in the position of the other who must be saved? How do we break down that us and them?
More dialogue with the people who just supposedly help them.
Okay.
Have them talk and say what they need. And there are many countries where they are doing those things.
Yes.
People have been, like you said, for some of them for generations. Maybe
Yes.
not at this pace that we would like them to improve, but they have been doing a lot. It's just not as obvious as when we have all the, marketing machine behind us and financial. So we could really help if we worked with people instead of for them.
Okay. Definitely. Yeah. What's your name?
Olga.
Olga.
I think language matters a lot, like maybe empowering rather than saving. So I think it comes from the mindset that you start off with.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. If we go back to the very beginning of the presentation, these aren't just words. They aren't innocent. They're chosen, right? And so we have to choose them carefully. I'm absolutely certain they chose their words carefully. I mean, this is like $1 million production thing here. And, I understand that this is a complex thing that they're trying to distill into 3 minutes. But one would also think, with all of that money, that they might be able to tell a slightly different story. And I just want to end on this note to be fair. If you get a chance to look at the Novo Foundation, the Novo Foundation is the Buffett's foundation. And I have a slide. I'll just flash it really quickly so I don't have to try to remember it. But there's a lot up here. But this is the purpose statement of the Novo Foundation. And they talk about conquest and colonialism. They talk about rampant competition, exploitation, and domination, what we might call neoliberal capitalism. They talk about the powerful interests of a few override the quality of life and equity for all, the deep underpinnings of a system that doesn't nourish humanity and life for everybody. They're interested in peace, compassion, justice, and love. Really complex, inherently messy, difficult to operationalize concepts is what the Novo Foundation says. And they're one of the primary funders of the Girl Effect, but all of that gets lost once we get to these videos, right? What is lost when we instrumentalize, when we make human experience into marketing? And then what do we as people who can't necessarily get on a plane and go talk to people in southern Kenya or go talk to people in Chechnya, how do we then engage in ways that actually force us to kind of think about all of these things Novo Foundation says we should think about, but the Girl Effect does not require of us? I guess that's the thought that I'll leave you with, because I think we're out of time. Am I right?
We have 10 minutes.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Well, then tell me what you think. How do we move beyond awareness to engagement? We try to engage with the actual people so we can see them as allies, right? Rather than beneficiaries. That's one thing that we have out there. Yeah.
I actually feel like we kind of need to step back and go back to education of the Western world or the global north, because I feel like as a whole we don't understand our privilege and we don't understand our effect that we previously had and we're still having on the rest of the world, and our role in making the girl as just a mother and just a prostitute, and our role in that, we instead focus on how we can fix it instead of looking back at what we did to make it that way.
Why do you think that is?
Why we don't know these things, or
Yeah.
why we focus on fixing?
Well, because they're related, right?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure because I really need to continue my education. But especially white people, I guess I don't know how to say this like unproblematically, but we've done a lot of really shitty things, and we're still doing really shitty things, and we still kind of cover it up with we're making things better. And who are we making it better for? We're making it better for white people, despite the fact that we're claiming that we're making it better for everyone. But
Okay, so what do you all think? Do you all agree with Olga? Yeah. No, you're not Olga, you're
Elise.
Elise, sorry, I'm terrible. It was like my brain doesn't function like that. But anyway, go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, I understand from like a psychological perspective why instead of wondering why it is the way it is, why someone would just want to be like, okay, let's just fix it, let's paper over it. But that being said, there are a lot of good initiatives out there right now, like microfinance institutions like Kiva, where people here from Western countries can lend money, not donate, but lend money to people who want to start businesses, and they'll get the money back. So it's not like charity, it's helping somebody, but in dignified manner so that they can better their own lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point, because what we don't want to be left with as well, gosh, all we do is contribute to like neocolonialism. We do anything so we can't do anything, right? That shouldn't be the answer either. The answer shouldn't be you just click, send your $10, wipe your hands of it, and go to Mill Avenue. Or we do nothing because there's nothing we can do to really make a difference because we're really the problem anyway. Like, we got to figure out something that brings this critical awareness together with actual inspired action that might be very idealistic and unrealistic. But we kind of need that. Like, we need both of those together to drive something like a Kiva. You can't do that unless you're idealistic. But you also can't do that unless you're thinking about the whole picture. You're coming back to the context. You're not trying to say, let's take this child completely away from everything she knows so she can be empowered. My research is in southern Kenya and Maasai communities with schoolgirls. And I had a very enlightening afternoon one day when I was invited to a conversation by some local Maasai leaders. And there was a woman from the United States. She was actually a representative of the, oh gosh, I'll get the organization right. I want to, like the Global Council of Churches or something, I think was the name. And the organization was interested in creating a rescue center in this part of Maasai area for girls who wanted to escape forced marriage, escape female cutting, or any other kind of violence they felt like that they were experiencing in their home, and they needed a place to go. So this organization wanted to build a rescue center that would also be a primary school. So in the Kenyan context, primary school is like kindergarten through 8th grade. And then you have to take an exam at 8th grade, and depending on your scores on that exam, you may or may not go on to high school. And high school you have to pay for. So even if you have those scores, you can the bottleneck gets pretty tight because not everybody, including boys, go to high school because of the fees. And so they were proposing building this rescue center with a primary school involved where they would teach the girls how to sew and how to garden. And the local leaders, so I'm just there, just listening. The local Maasai leaders, men and women, were horrified and pissed off. I mean, I didn't actually expect that, to tell you the truth. But they were like, okay, what is 8th grade? 8th grade is nothing. They might as well not be in school at all, frankly. They need to finish high school and they need to go to college. Who's going to ensure that? 2, why do they want to learn how to garden? We live in a desert. And, you know, because it is effectively a desert. They need to learn something that's actually going to get them jobs. Sewing, not bad. They can be a seamstress, but maybe they can feed one other person on that income. But can we get them an income that they can actually sustain a family on, not just these sort of minimal things, right? And then they said, and once you remove her from her family and make her family the enemy because she's run from them, who takes care of her for the rest of her life? Are you going to do that? Are you going to provide the cows when she's ready to marry? Are you going to take her to college? Are you going to have the feast when she has her first baby? Who is going to do that if she's removed from her community? Well, the lady was very shocked, and it was very interesting to watch this conversation because this group of individuals are very against early marriage, very against female cutting, very pro-girls' education. But their approach to something like a girl who was being forced into early marriage or a girl who was being forced into female cutting was very different. It was to go and say, look, Dad, what are you doing? What can we do to help you? Because this is really about money at this point. This is not about culture. If he had the money to have her in school and wasn't seduced by the money that would come from the marriage, he was like, fine, put her in school. So the local NGO's attitude was, we need to keep the family together somehow and not pull her from it and not put her in a context where after, if she makes it to 8th grade, she's got nobody but herself. So coming back to your point, I think there is a lot of value in sort of that local knowledge, but then we, you know, as you were suggesting, we run into this trouble of like the money and the resources to sort of harness local knowledge. So how can we take outside money and outside resources in collaboration, in solidarity with that kind of local knowledge to work from there? Recognizing, coming back to your point, Elise, your point that we can't really undo centuries of disparity between us and them. We can't undo that, not in a day, probably not in a century. But we can definitely try to change the playing field, right? And that happens at all levels. So not only should you be clicking to invest in a girl, you should be writing your congressman. And you should be thinking about how the International Monetary Fund is set up and what on earth is the World Bank and why should you care, right? This is how you start learning. This is how you move toward engagement, but it's kind of a long and messy process. It's a heck of a lot harder than hitting a click. Okay, so I'm afraid I don't want to keep you from your lunch, and I'm confused about the time. When are we supposed to be done? 11:15?
Yeah, about 5 minutes.
Okay, so so anybody who hasn't said anything, I've forgotten your name. Aylin? Aylin? Was there anything you wanted to add?
No.
Or any questions that you have?
No.
Okay, and what about you? Nothing? Okay. Rachel, Anastasia?
I mean, you touched on a lot of really important things about the girl effect, and it's really problematic. But I think, like we were talking about before, the fact that people begin to struggle with it, there's also something to be said for that.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we toss it,
Right.
right? The baby with the bathwater thing. We don't have to walk away, but we do have to be a little skeptical, but not cynical. That is a really hard act, but it's not impossible. People are doing it all the time. And I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Excuse me for pointing. What's your name?
I'm Michio.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to ask or add?
Yeah, I'm now researching about human rights for and women's reproductive rights. And I was wondering why, what is the criteria? So whose criteria is best for the world? So because everybody has some ideas, and so we cannot mention, so we can't ignore, so all of them. But so we always think about the criteria is very westernized.
Yes.
So it's very important. It must be a problematic situation. So, but so we tend to obey the westernized. So yeah, it's very big and but important thing. So.
Yeah, you make a really good point because for people who work in development organizations, whether they're little small NGOs or big things like the Gates Foundation or the UN, there are people who are interested, like the Novo language, who understand the history and who want to function in different ways, but somehow there's like this invisible force field that says, no, it has to be like this. We have to instrumentalize. It has to be about economic development. We're not really talking about their personal development too much, but they can save the economy if they get in school. In Kenya, for example, there's a 40% unemployment rate. That's not from lack of education, right? That's from a whole structural shift in the way that that country works, in part because of its obligations to the larger world. And if in 2003, when primary school became free, those schools were inundated with people. Some of whom were 6 years old like they were supposed to be. Some of them were 16, some of them were 26, who were saying, school's free, I'm ready. And the system could not handle it. They didn't have the teachers, they didn't have the desks, they didn't have the walls. So people had to get turned away. Or they sat there and they said, oh my gosh, I can't learn anything in this context. Parents came and took their kids out. Older people left. So figuring out the entire sticky wicket, as you're saying, this deep and problematic puzzle is going to take a lot of creative thinking. Do you agree as a group that the girl effect as a discourse is important and useful?
Definitely. All sides of it.
Despite the problems.
Definitely. because otherwise nobody will do anything. Like you said, you're never going to have a perfect situation, so nothing will ever happen. And I wanted to say to Elise that there is a good side to it. I grew up in India, lived in the Middle East, and then have lived here for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of different things of how, a lot of people do appreciate, for example, Americans. Let's focus on Americans. Americans are truly considered one of the most generous groups of people in the world, okay? And Americans do help even when local communities in certain countries don't. So that is appreciated. It's not all negative. There's a lot of it, that's why I said there's a lot of good intentions behind all this. So that's good, and a lot of dialogue and things like that come from countries like this. And that's where education does help. But then we have to also realize that things are not that simple, and we just can't throw out a few words like education and all of that. Culture, the reality, the facts of life do make a difference. If you go to the village elders, the girl is supposed to go to the village councils or whatever and say, look, this is it, everything's good. Most people will not accept that. Even other women, it's not just men who won't. Other women.
Right. Well, I'm trying to imagine, the 16-year-old going to the board of Intel and saying, look, I have some ideas. You guys ready to listen? They're not going to listen. Those are our elders, right?
Yes.
The kings and the very few queens of industry and the capitalist economy in the United States. But even at the very local level, like the grandfathers who gather to go play golf on Sunday, they also might not listen. We don't necessarily have 18-year-old girls calling the shots in the United States, or Great Britain, or Australia, these other pinnacles of development. So coming back to your earlier point, it's one of the risks, I would say, and this is another just quick story I'll tell you. I have a friend who does research with teenage girls who are delegates to the United Nations for the Commission on the Status of Women. So they are teenagers, they're 16 to 18, they're going to the UN and they're participating in these meetings. And they're supposed to be speaking for their disempowered sisters over there, because they come primarily from North America, so Canada, the United States, but then some other, sort of literally token people from Africa, Asia, other places. When she talked with these young women about the girl effect as an idea, not specifically this, but sort of the turn to the girl in development, they said over and over again things like, well, there's double standards in Canada, and my gym teacher is kind of creepy, but at least I'm not being married off at 15. So their own political agency is being disempowered. Right? Because by this assumption that they got it all, and now they have an obligation to fix those who don't have enough. Even as they say, they themselves are dealing with gender disparity, discrimination, sexism, racism, classism every day, and sometimes violence. So the dynamic is very powerful and it's very profound, and I think now we do have to stop. Sorry, my sense of time is very warped. I hope that you will continue to care about the girl effect, but in engaged and complicated ways. And when you talk to your friends, you'll get them to think in engaged and complicated ways in your family. And as you go on about your life, that's how you'll do it. Does that sound good? Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much. Also, if you want to take a women's studies class, I'm teaching one called Girlhood and Adolescence in the fall. If you have taken Women's Studies 100, then you can take it, even though it's a 400 level class. But you have to have had the 100 to take it.
All right, thank you, Dr. Switzer. Next up, we have lunch in the Mojave Room, and then that is free subway. And then right after lunch is, in that same room, our keynote lecture on honor killings, rape, and women's rights in Pakistan by Habiba Nosheen. So, see you there.
Thank you, Megan.
Oh, yeah.
You want to wear it now, right?
I'm going to wear it now.
remember reading our advisory.
Oh, yes, and, like I said, I don't do anything you guys do on here.
We'll cover it.
Do you still go to Kenya or not?
I do.
Is that-
Yeah, I'll be there this summer, but really just kind of for fun. It's kind of a family trip, but I'll see, oh, thank you, I'll see my, friends who I lived with when I was there last summer doing some research, and then